The phone rang just as I was unpacking the last moving box in my new country house. It was a peaceful Sunday afternoon, the kind of calm I'd dreamed about when I decided to leave the city behind. The smell of fresh paint still lingered in the air, mixing with the earthy scent of pine trees drifting in from the open windows. I smiled when I saw my daughter's name flash across the screen. "Hey, sweetheart," I said, wiping my hands on a towel. Her voice came through bright and excited. "Dad, guess what? We're coming over." I chuckled. "That's great. When?" "In an hour," she said quickly, then added with a mischievous laugh, "We'll be there with 20. I froze. "20 what?" "People," she replied as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "The whole crew, the kids, some friends, and a few of the neighbors. We can't wait to see your new place." The line went dead before I could respond. For a moment, I stood there, staring at the silent phone in disbelief. 20 people. In an hour. And here I was, no groceries, no chairs, no plan. Just me, a half-unpacked house, and a porch that still smelled like wet wood stain. I took a deep breath and looked around at my quiet new home. "Well," I muttered, "welcome to the countryside, I guess." Outside, the wind rustled through the tall grass, almost as if it were laughing along with me. The moment I hung up the phone, reality hit me like a freight train. An hour. 60 minutes before 20 people descended on my brand new, half-furnished country house. I looked around, boxes still stacked in corners, dishes scattered on the counter, and a single lonely chair sitting in the living room. The refrigerator hummed quietly, empty except for a carton of milk and a jar of mustard. It felt like the setup for a bad sitcom. "All right," I muttered, rolling up my sleeves, "let's turn this disaster into something halfway presentable." I started in the living room, shoving boxes into the spare bedroom and tossing old newspapers into a trash bag. Dust swirled in the air, catching the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. Every creak of the wooden floor reminded me just how new, and yet how fragile, this house still felt. Next, I sprinted to the kitchen. I found an unopened bag of chips and a 6-pack of soda I'd forgotten to unpack. Not exactly a feast, but it was something. The pantry shelves were bare, so I lined up what little I had: crackers, instant noodles, and a single jar of pickles. "A real 5-star spread," I said under my breath. Outside, I set up the old picnic table I'd brought from the city apartment's balcony. It was wobbly and uneven, but it would have to do. I dragged over a few folding chairs from the garage and tried to make the setup look country charming. As I worked, I couldn't help but laugh. A week ago, I'd pictured peaceful mornings with coffee and birdsong, not hosting a small army of visitors on my very first day. Then I heard it, the distant hum of engines. I froze, glancing down the long gravel driveway that cut through the tall grass. A faint cloud of dust was rising in the distance. "They're early," I whispered. My pulse quickened as I wiped the sweat from my forehead and took one last look around. The house still looked like a construction zone, but at least it was mine. The country quiet I had just started to love was about to be replaced by laughter, chaos, and, if I knew my daughter, a whole lot of noise. The low rumble of engines grew louder until I could finally make out the first car, a silver SUV kicking up dust as it turned onto the gravel drive. Behind it came another, and then another, until a caravan of vehicles was snaking its way toward my front yard. I counted as they rolled in: 5 cars, a minivan, even a pickup truck packed with coolers and folding chairs. "Good grief," I muttered. "It really is 20. The first door burst open before the engines even shut off. My daughter, Emily, jumped out, her long hair whipping in the wind. "Dad," she called, waving both arms. "This place is amazing." I tried to smile, hiding my panic. "It's still a work in progress," I said, eyeing the boxes I'd tried to hide behind the curtains. But it was too late. Her friends were already pouring out of the cars, laughing, talking over each other, and hauling bags, picnic baskets, and even a small speaker. A group of kids ran across the yard, chasing each other through the tall grass. Someone's dog barked excitedly and nearly tripped over my welcome mat. Within 5 minutes, the quiet countryside I'd been savoring all morning had turned into a full-blown family gathering, one I hadn't planned for. "Where should we set up the grill?" A man I barely recognized shouted. "Do you have ice?" Another asked, peering into my kitchen like he lived there. "Dad, the view from your porch is perfect for photos." Emily called out, already snapping pictures on her phone. I stood there in the middle of the chaos, half amused, half horrified. There was no stopping it now. All right, I said finally, clapping my hands together. Let's make this work. Someone cheered, and the next thing I knew, music was blasting from a speaker, people were laughing, and kids were chasing bubbles down the driveway. My quiet afternoon had turned into a country block party, completely unplanned, but oddly, alive. As I looked around, watching Emily laugh with her friends under the wide blue sky, something softened in me. Maybe this was what the house needed, a little noise, a little life. Still, I couldn't shake one thought as I noticed the growing crowd and the mountain of coolers unloading from the trucks. I really hope the plumbing's ready for 20 people. At first, everything seemed to be going better than I expected. The grill was fired up, kids were running around playing tag, and laughter echoed through the open fields. Even the dog, who I later learned didn't belong to anyone I knew, was having the time of his life chasing sticks. But country houses have their quirks, and mine was about to show all of them. It started small. The power flickered just as someone plugged in a second speaker. Probably just a hiccup, I said, waving it off. A few minutes later, the lights in the kitchen dimmed again. Then came the unmistakable smell of smoke. I bolted inside. My daughter's friend, a well-meaning guy named Kyle, was fanning a smoking toaster oven with a dish towel. It was just frozen garlic bread. He said defensively. How was I supposed to know the oven's dial goes backward? Before I could answer, a loud shriek came from the backyard. I rushed outside to find one of the kids standing at the edge of the garden, pointing at something in the tall grass. Snake, she screamed. Half the adults jumped back, the other half pulled out their phones to film it. I grabbed a rake and cautiously moved the grass aside, only to find a long, sun-bleached garden hose coiled under a bush. I held it up. You're dangerous snake, ladies and gentlemen. The group burst into laughter. Someone raised a soda can like a toast. To Dad, the brave snake hunter. I rolled my eyes but smiled. Maybe a little chaos wasn't so bad after all. That's when I noticed the sink, water gurgling, then slowing to a miserable drip. No, 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 I muttered, turning the knob back and forth. Nothing. The well pump had stopped working. Within minutes, the bathroom was out of water, the kitchen was dry, and the once cheerful crowd began asking, "Hey, do you have bottled water?" I tried to stay calm. But inside, I was screaming. 20 people, one broken well pump, and a half-cooked meal. This was supposed to be my peaceful retreat, not a survival challenge. As I stepped outside to assess the pump shed, my daughter followed, smiling sheepishly. Sorry, Dad. I probably should have given you a little more warning. I sighed, staring at the growing crowd of hungry, thirsty guests. A little warning would have been nice, yeah. The wind picked up, rustling the trees. A storm was brewing on the horizon. Literally. Dark clouds rolled over the fields, and a low rumble of thunder echoed in the distance. I rubbed the back of my neck and muttered, "Oh, perfect timing." By the time I reached the pump shed, the first cold drops of rain had already started to fall, fat, heavy splashes that darkened the dirt driveway. Within minutes, the breeze had turned into a strong wind that whipped through the trees and sent paper plates flying off the picnic table. Everybody inside, I shouted over the growing gusts. The crowd scrambled. Kids ran for the porch, adults grabbed coolers, and someone tried to save the half-grilled burgers before the rain drenched them. The dog, of course, thought it was all a game and ran in circles, barking at the thunder. By the time we got everyone indoors, the rain was pounding against the windows like gravel. Water streamed down the glass, lightning flashed, and the power gave one last flicker before cutting out completely. The house fell into sudden darkness, broken only by the pale blue glow of phone screens. Dad, Emily's voice came from somewhere near the kitchen. Do you have candles? Yeah, I said, fumbling through a drawer. At least, I think I do. After a frantic search, I found a box of half-burned candles from my old apartment and a lighter that barely sparked. Within minutes, little flames flickered throughout the house, casting warm, uneven light over everyone's faces. Despite the chaos, there was something oddly comforting about it. Everyone huddled together, laughing nervously as thunder boomed outside. The kids sat cross-legged on the floor, playing games with flashlights, while the adults shared stories by candlelight. Emily handed me a mug of lukewarm soda. Not exactly how you pictured your first day here, huh? She teased. I chuckled. Not even close. I was expecting silence, not a sleepover with 20 uninvited guests and a hurricane. She smiled, leaning her head on my shoulder. You always said you wanted more life in your days. I couldn't argue with that. As the storm raged on, I checked the windows and doors, making sure everything was secure. Outside, the trees bent under the wind, and the sound of rain on the roof turned into a steady roar. Yet somehow, inside that little candlelit room, the house felt alive for the first time. Someone started telling ghost stories, laughter followed, and even the dog curled up by the fireless fireplace like he belonged there. I looked around at the flickering light on the walls, the same walls that had seemed so empty just hours before, and thought, maybe this house isn't meant to be quiet after all. Then came a loud bang from outside, sharp, metallic, and close. Everyone froze. What was that? Emily whispered. I set my mug down slowly, my heartbeat picking up. I don't know, I said, grabbing a flashlight. But I'm going to find out. The room fell silent except for the relentless drumming of rain on the roof. Every face turned toward me as I slowly stood, flashlight in hand. The beam quivered slightly as I clicked it on and aimed it toward the nearest window. Nothing, just sheets of rain and the dark silhouette of trees bending in the wind. But that sound, it hadn't been thunder. It was sharper, metallic, like something had fallen, or worse, someone was out there. I'll be right back, I said, grabbing my jacket. Dad, don't, Emily called, her voice tight. It's pouring. Just wait until the storm passes. But curiosity, and a flicker of unease, pushed me forward. It's probably nothing, I said, though I didn't quite believe it. The moment I stepped outside, the wind hit me like a wall. My flashlight beam cut through the rain, bouncing off puddles and the glistening siding of the house. I moved toward the pump shed, my boots sinking into the mud with each step. Lightning flashed, and for a split second, I saw it. The metal gate to the shed had been torn off its hinges. And was lying in the grass. The chain lock dangled loosely, snapped clean through. I swallowed hard and swept the light around. The shed door hung open, banging softly in the wind. I approached slowly, my heart thudding in my chest. Hello, I called out, though I wasn't sure who I expected to answer. No response. Just the sound of rain hammering the roof. Inside, tools were scattered across the floor, wrenches, hoses, even a broken lantern. The old water pump sat in the corner, its casing cracked open like someone had tried to pry it apart. That's when I saw the footprints, muddy, human, and fresh. They led away from the shed, toward the back fence that bordered the woods. A gust of wind slammed the door against the frame, making me jump. I turned and aimed the flashlight toward the tree line, just in time to catch a shadow, a tall, thin figure moving between the trees. Hey! I shouted, taking a step forward. The figure froze, then darted deeper into the darkness. For a moment, I stood there in the rain, torn between chasing them and running back inside. But then another flash of lightning illuminated the yard, and I saw something glinting in the mud near the pump. It was a small, rusted key. I bent down, picked it up, and turned it over in my hand. It didn't look like anything from my house. As thunder rolled across the sky, I felt that uneasy chill that tells you something's not right. This wasn't just a broken pump or a storm. Someone had been here, and maybe they still were. I pocketed the key and hurried back toward the house, rain stinging my face. Inside, I could see candlelight flickering through the windows, warm, safe, unaware. When I stepped back into the living room, dripping and pale, Emily rushed over. Dad, what happened? What was it? I hesitated, glancing back at the dark yard beyond the door. Nothing, I said quietly. Just the wind. But I knew that wasn't true. The rest of the night stretched on, thick with tension. Outside, the storm began to ease, but the unease inside the house only grew stronger. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the shutters made everyone glance nervously toward the windows. I sat quietly near the front door, turning the small rusted key over and over in my hand. It was old, older than anything in the house, and its bow was carved with a faint symbol, something like a crescent wrapped around a cross. I didn't recognize it. Emily noticed me staring at it. Dad, she said softly, you're sure it was nothing out there? I forced a smile. Yeah, just some wind damage, that's all. But the light tasted heavy. The image of that tall, thin figure slipping into the woods wouldn't leave my mind. Whoever it was had been close, too close. Around midnight, most of the group had either fallen asleep on couches and floors or quietly whispered around the candlelight. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the air felt heavy, almost charged. I decided to take another look outside. I slipped my flashlight into my pocket and stepped onto the porch. The world beyond the door was eerily still, the kind of silence that follows a big storm, where even the crickets are hesitant to start up again. The wet grass glistened under the dim moonlight. I walked toward the fence where I'd seen the footprints disappear. The mud was slick beneath my boots, but the prints were still there, only now, they led back toward the house. I froze. They stopped about 10 feet from the porch steps. The last print pointed directly toward the front door. My pulse thudded in my ears as I slowly raised my flashlight. That's when I saw it, caught in the beam, half buried in the mud. A piece of cloth, torn, dark, and soaked through. I bent down and lifted it carefully. It was part of a jacket sleeve, flannel, ripped clean at the seam, with a small brass button that had the same strange crescent symbol as the key. I didn't move for a long time. The rain whispered through the trees, and somewhere deep in the woods, a branch snapped. When I finally turned back toward the house, I noticed something else. One of the upstairs windows, the one in the guest room, was open. I knew for a fact I hadn't left it that way. I tightened my grip on the flashlight and slowly stepped back inside. Everyone was asleep. The candles had burned low, their wax dripping down the sides of glass jars. I moved quietly up the staircase, careful not to wake anyone. Each step creaked louder than I wanted it to. At the top of the stairs, the open window gaped into the night, curtains swaying slightly in the cool air. I approached it slowly, heart pounding. Rain had pooled on the floorboards, mixing with faint muddy footprints. And then I heard it, a single floorboard creak behind me. I spun around, flashlight shaking in my hand, and the beam caught a glimpse of movement at the end of the hallway. A shadow, tall, still, watching. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it slipped back into the darkness. I stood frozen in place, the silence stretching so thin it hurt my ears. Whatever had been outside, was now inside. The beam from my flashlight trembled as I stood at the top of the stairs, staring down the dark hallway. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd imagined it, the shadow, the movement, but then a faint sound broke the silence. Creak. Another floorboard, just beyond the guest room. Someone, or something, was up there with me. I tightened my grip on the flashlight and took a slow, steady step forward. "Hello," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Who's there?" No answer. Just the distant rumble of thunder fading beyond the hills. The house suddenly felt enormous, every doorway a mouth, every corner a hiding place. I passed the first bedroom, empty. The second, quiet except for the soft breathing of two of Emily's friends sleeping on the floor. I kept moving. When I reached the guest room, the open window fluttered again, letting in the smell of rain and earth. The footprints led right to the edge of the rug, and stopped. I crouched down, shining the light over the floorboards. No footprints leading away. Whoever had climbed in, hadn't left. A chill crawled up my spine. I slowly lifted the flashlight toward the far corner of the room, and that's when I saw it. The closet door was slightly ajar. Just enough for a shadow to fall across the carpet. I took a step closer. The air seemed to thicken. My breath caught in my throat. Behind me, the stairs creaked again, a soft, hesitant step. "Dad," Emily's voice. Small, trembling. I nearly jumped out of my skin. "Emily, stay downstairs," I whispered harshly. She ignored me, climbing up the last few steps. I heard something. "What's going on?" I turned back to the closet. "Go back down. Now." But before either of us could move, the closet door suddenly swung open. Emily gasped. I raised the flashlight, and there, crouched inside, was a man. His clothes were soaked through, mud streaked across his arms and face. He looked maybe 40, thin but wiry, with sharp eyes that squinted against the light. "Don't move," I said, my voice steady now, even though my hands were shaking. "Who are you? What are you doing in my house?" He didn't answer right away. He just looked at me, or maybe through me, breathing hard, chest rising and falling. Finally, he spoke in a low, cracked voice. "This used to be my home," he said. "Before they sold it." Emily grabbed my arm. "Dad," she whispered. The man raised a hand. Not threateningly, but pleading. "Please," he said. "Don't call the police. I just needed to make sure they didn't take everything. There's something still here, something that belongs to me." His eyes darted toward my pocket, where I had the small rusted key. And in that moment, I realized, he wasn't just trespassing. He was looking for it. The key. Lightning flashed outside, flooding the room in white for an instant. When it faded, the man was still staring at me, his expression unreadable, half desperation, half warning. "Please," he whispered again. "Don't use that key. No matter what you do." Then, before I could say another word, he lunged toward the window, and disappeared into the stormy night. For a long moment after the man vanished, neither Emily nor I spoke. The open window flapped in the wind, the curtains snapping like sails. My hands were trembling, my flashlight beam still fixed on the empty space where he'd stood. "Dad," Emily finally whispered, "what just happened? Who was that?" I didn't have an answer. My heart was still racing, my mind trying to process his last words, "Don't use that key." I reached into my pocket and pulled it out. Even in the dim light, the small rusted key seemed heavier now, colder. The strange crescent symbol carved into it caught the glow of my flashlight. "This used to be his home," I murmured, more to myself than to Emily. But what could he be looking for? We shut and locked the window, though it felt pointless now. Sleep was impossible. I sat at the kitchen table long after everyone else had drifted off, the candle flickering low beside me, the key resting in front of me like a question I didn't want to answer. Just before dawn, I heard footsteps again, but this time, not from outside. From the basement. I hesitated. The basement door was old and heavy, the kind that groaned every time you touched it. Slowly, I opened it and peered down into the darkness. The air was cold and damp, smelling faintly of earth and old wood. The sound came again, soft, rhythmic, like water dripping, or something moving. I clicked on the flashlight and descended the stairs one creaky step at a time. At the bottom, the beam caught the outline of shelves, old paint cans, and, near the far wall, a large wooden chest I hadn't noticed before. It was half buried under a dusty tarp. I knelt beside it and brushed off the dirt. On the front was a small keyhole, the same crescent symbol etched above it. My stomach tightened. "No," I muttered. "No way." The key in my hand suddenly felt ice cold. But curiosity, or something deeper, pushed me forward. I slid the key into the lock. It fit perfectly. I hesitated, remembering the man's warning, "Don't use that key." For a second, I almost stopped myself. Then I turned it. Click. The lock popped open with a dull snap. I lifted the lid slowly. Inside was a stack of old papers, bundled with twine, and something wrapped in cloth. I pulled it out carefully. It was a small, leather-bound notebook. The pages were yellowed, water-stained, and filled with cramped handwriting. At the very top of the first page, written in fading ink, were the words, "To whoever finds this, the truth about this house must stay buried." My breath caught. I flipped to the next page. There were dates, strange diagrams, and mentions of names I didn't recognize: Marin, Wells, Carter. In the margins, a phrase appeared over and over. "The well isn't dry, it's sealed." Behind me, a floorboard creaked. I turned sharply, shining my flashlight toward the stairs, but no one was there. Just the hum of the wind outside and the faint whisper of dripping water. When I looked back at the chest, one of the papers had shifted on its own, fluttering slightly. Beneath it, carved into the wood, were the same initials that appeared in the notebook, J.M. The same initials that were burned into the beam above the fireplace upstairs. That's when I realized, the man from the closet hadn't just been a trespasser. He was the previous owner. And whatever had driven him to hide that chest, was still connected to the house. The sky was a pale gray by the time I stepped outside again. The storm had passed, but the air still hung thick with moisture and the faint smell of rain-soaked earth. I didn't wake anyone. Emily and the others were still asleep inside, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for me to finish what I had started. The man's words echoed in my head, "Don't use that key." And the notebook's warning, "The well isn't dry, it's sealed." I crossed the yard toward the old stone well near the edge of the property. I hadn't paid much attention to it before. It was overgrown with vines and half covered with a warped wooden lid. But now, seeing it in the misty morning light, it looked older than anything else on the land, ancient, almost. The wooden planks covering the mouth were nailed down crudely, as if someone had tried to keep something in, not out. I knelt beside it and brushed away a layer of moss. The same crescent and cross symbol was carved faintly into the stone rim. My hand went instinctively to my pocket. The key was still there. Heavy. Cold. For a long moment, I just stared at the well. Part of me wanted to walk away, to lock the notebook in a drawer, sell the house, and forget any of this had ever happened. But another part of me needed to know. Needed to understand why a man would break into his old home during a storm to make sure this well stayed sealed. I pried loose one of the wooden planks. The sound of nails squealing against old wood echoed across the yard. The air that came out was cold and stale, like the breath of something that hadn't been disturbed in decades. I peered inside. The beam of my flashlight barely reached the bottom, but I could see water, black and still, about 15 feet down. And then, something else. A shape. Round. Metallic. I leaned closer, angling the light. It wasn't a bucket or a pipe. It was a small iron lockbox, just visible beneath the surface of the water. The notebook's words flashed through my mind again. The well isn't dry, it's sealed. I dropped a stone into the water. It splashed, echoing deep below, and then, another sound followed it. A faint clank, like something shifting. Then the water began to ripple. I stepped back, heart hammering. The ripples grew wider, faster, until the surface churned violently. I stumbled, tripping over the wet grass, as a rush of cold air blasted up from the well like a breath from the earth itself. And then, silence. The water stilled. The air went dead still. When I dared to look again, the lockbox was gone. The surface was perfectly smooth, reflecting the gray sky above, except for one small detail. A rusted key, identical to the one in my pocket, now floating gently on the water's surface. I didn't touch it. I backed away slowly, breath uneven, and turned toward the house. As I reached the porch, Emily was standing at the door, wrapped in a blanket, eyes wide. "Dad, what's going on?" she asked softly. I looked back once more. The vines around the well seemed to be curling tighter around the stones, closing in again, as if the earth itself was reclaiming what I'd disturbed. "Nothing," I said quietly, forcing a faint smile. "Just checking the water." But deep down, I knew I had uncovered something that didn't want to be found, something that had been buried for a reason. That night, when the wind returned and the old pipes groaned in the walls, I thought. I heard a faint sound rising from below the house. Not wind. Not water. A whisper. And somewhere in the dark, the key on my nightstand began to hum.